I'm Rex Holmes, the project manager for Keystone Construction. I'd like to thank you all for coming out this morning and giving us your time. I'd like everyone from my team to introduce themselves, and then we'll jump into a little bit about our company, and then a little bit about how we went about going through means and methods and through our estimate.
I'm Matt Harrington, logistical coordinator.
Cameron Hunt, lead estimator.
Timothy Tran, assistant project manager.
Ben Carpenter, assistant estimator.
And I'm Caleb Carney, and I'm the safety manager. Right now, I'm going to go through a little bit of background of Keystone Construction. We were founded in the September of 2000. We started off as a concrete construction service, so you know we do concrete. We're very towards the environmental side of concrete, so we tend to try to conserve as much as we can and to harm the environment as less as we possibly can. Kind of reduce our carbon footprint a little bit. We are very strong with the contractor-client relationship whenever it comes to our contracts. We try our best to close a strong relationship with our clients and to make sure that communication is key throughout whatever we do. A little bit of safety. At Keystone Construction, safety is above all else. That's definitely our number one priority. Without safety, a lot of bad things can go wrong. The time of the construction site when it's due could lag a little bit, and plus the costs of insurance and injuries definitely exceed above all else. We do have a couple of cranes working on throughout our construction site, and we have a few. We have some on-site training due to that, so we make sure that our construction workers are wearing their PPEs at all times. We enforce heavy rules and guidelines against that, which is in the safety plan that we created as a team. We make sure that our construction site is also very clean, very well organized. Without that, we have no way of we would have no way of organizing, and that would just create a huge mess for all. And as I reiterated earlier, I said earlier, safety starts with us, and safety starts with construction workers. So we make sure that they know that. We make sure that they're the first line of defense and that they use their common sense in whatever they do, and they don't do anything to harm each other or themselves.
So I'll just go over some job overview here. The scope of work we had was to complete the concrete structural work throughout the project and to supply and install reinforcing steel and other necessary materials to complete the project. Some waste management issues I'll get into right here through my job overview is to begin the project, we had this idea of saving some water to help with sustainability. So for the 2/3 water leakage test, we at first proposed to have a tank off-site. We understand that the owner is providing water to us, but to save him money and to just be more sustainable, we proposed to put water into a tank on-site for the test when we would fill the whole tank. Now this right here, this was a logistical problem. We would have to, the tank was very large, we would have to structure the site, maybe even pour a concrete slab. We found it to be inefficient and not cost effective for the project. So we decided to not have it. There was a consideration we made. Also for right here, we have form work, like a break apart. We'll have a laborer on site to take the formwork apart for recycling purposes. Once again, keeping sustainable construction practices without use.
This project posed a couple of interesting little hiccups while we were doing some of our logistical coordinating. One thing that we've always had a lot of emphasis on, and that today so far we've even touched on plenty, is safety. And any time you have anything where, like, say your form has a punched opening through it or things like that, obviously you can cause rigidity issues and things like that. So what we wanted to do is always assess any time that we were having to punch through any formwork or anything like that. So for any of our tie-ins with the walls and things like that, for our slope fibrous concrete, being that we did have tied concrete or ties into the slab and the walls, we wanted to make sure that we engineered our formwork to be correctly shored and things like that, so that we don't have any splitting or anything like that. So that was just one example, and it's just one of the quickest examples that you can kind of look at the project and see that that might be an issue. You can go to the next slide for me. One thing that we were looking into is how can we make this a little more efficient for everyone involved. One way that we can do it is this particular, the set of beams that we're using for basically the cap slab. The only issue with the way that it's designed is it's very inefficient to cast in place as it is. And so what we decided to do is being who we are, we have the capability of actually casting that and then putting it in place without any added cost. In fact, it would be reduced cost and it would be reduced time because of the fact that we could be casting those before we necessarily need them. And we can put them, we did the weight calculation, we can put them in place without having to have any sort of auxiliary crane brought on site or anything like that. And then of course you simply cast your slab on top of that, or you can cast those separately as well. So it gives us some of that buffer in there to be able to minimize our time footprint on the site with one small area. If you go to the next slide for me. So backfill on a site like this is obviously going to be some form of a point of coordination with other subcontractors. Being that we have an excavation subcontractor, we want to make sure that we're working with him. So we were planning out all of our backfills and with our setbacks. Now, of course, this is not to scale. I didn't have a large enough page to scale it for our 2-to-1 slope. But we have 3 phasings of backfill. The green is our first, and that's after our 2/3 water test. So, once we go through all of that, we can backfill our first 2/3, gravel under for our secondary slab, and then after our last test, we can do our final grading. The reason why we particularly pulled this out is because we strive to always work well with other subcontractors, and this is a part where if one of us is not doing our job, it's going to put the entire project behind. So we really wanted to make sure that we coordinated this well.
For the quantity takeoff, this project had 3 main components: the concrete, reinforcement steel, and formwork. So basically there's about 300 cubic yards of concrete, about 20 tons of reinforcement steel, and approximately 5,000 square feet area of formwork. Here's a snippet from Bluebeam Review, which is the software we use to do our takeoffs. And as you can see, it easily helps us scale and measure items on the drawings given to help us have an efficient and accurate takeoff.
So using the dimensions from Bluebeam, we calculated the cost of each individual piece, along with materials, labor, and equipment costs, and we came up with a rough cost of $123,000. And after taxes, overhead, etc., we came up with a cost of $145,000.
Back to the methods of our takeoff and estimate, we broke the entire project into different pieces: slabs, walls, and the elevated slab cap on top. And then furthermore, we broke it into components because the entire wall system cannot be cast at one time. So we were able to really have a very accurate takeoff because of the ability to break it down into smaller pieces. Additionally, the elevated slab and baffle had its own issues where we were able to have more. It was a little bit more difficult to do takeoff because of the different rebar that was used in it, and in order to identify all that, we really looked at that closely. And with that, Bluebeam really helped us with that because of its ability to really measure things down to the inch on the plans. Again, for our estimate, we used, for equipment and things of that nature, we used regional price data that we were able to obtain, and that helped us get a real accurate cost to the Mid-Atlantic region, as well as RSMeans, which is a widely used construction estimating tool for quantity takeoff and final bids.
I'll talk to you now about some scheduling things we had. So some lag times that we had to take into consideration were leakage tests, cure time, formwork, and corrosion-resistant coating. So for the leakage test, we had to pour the walls and then test the concrete after a 14-day cure time. So for the first wall, we poured it. And then we poured the second wall on top of it because we had to do it 2/3. And we had to do them in sections. And then after the 14-day cure time, we had to fill the tank with water 4 feet per hour, couldn't go over it. And then after it was full, we had to wait 72 hours, and then 48 hours for the test. So another lag time coordination was the corrosion-resistant coating. And this took 28 days to cure before you had to put the corrosion-resistant coating on, you had to cure the walls for 28 days. We integrated this throughout the process of the construction by the time that it takes to do this leak test. It cuts off the time in half when you can apply the corrosion-resistant coating.
So with this project, we kind of had some fun with it. We kind of got to explore a lot of ways that we could improve the way that we run efficiently and kind of manage our resources and our crew in a timely manner. One of the ways we did that was through equipment, and I'd just like Matt to kind of touch on some of these resources that we used throughout the process and with projects in the past and into the future.
Yeah, so here at Keystone, we like to kind of be on the cutting edge of things as long as it's cost efficient, time efficient. One nice thing is being able to check back with yourself and being able to make sure that everything that you built is in fact built to how you're supposed to. The other problem is going to be very time consuming. So what we do with models like this is we always integrate a robotic TSI because you can simply drop that down into the unit and be able to take your measurements and just verify that everything that you were supposed to have there is there as far as dimensionally. Concrete scanning and detection systems, these are an awesome tool these days, especially if you have a water retention sort of system, being that if you've ever had a leak, there's a good chance it's probably through some form of an opening through a wall or a slab or things like that. And a lot of that is because of air retention within the wall and things like that. So what we'd like to do is always scan individual units and pieces like that, because once we can scan them, we can always tell if there's any sort of issue in there that we need to go ahead and pump before we ever test or anything like that. And this saves a lot of time in the long run, being able to do our own preliminary testing and scanning.
As stated before and harped on through this entire presentation is our green outlook. We're always trying to have an impact on the environment that's healthy. So one of the ways that we do that is our investigation of different resources that we use in concrete. And one of those being is Portland cement. Just 1 ton of Portland cement has 1 ton of CO2 emitted into the atmosphere. So there's some ways that we can kind of combat this. And what we found is that slag cement actually reduces the CO2 output when combined with Portland cement by 50%. So that's a pretty recognizable number, and it kind of, over time, and if everyone engages in that, that avenue, we can really change the sustainability of the environment. But the kicker is that it doesn't impact the structural strength of the project, of the concrete. It actually increases it in certain instances. One thing we also like to focus on is Living Building Challenge and LEED. Living Building Challenge is kind of a new staple within the industry. It's kind of focused in smaller portions of construction, but it has some really great features that we kind of like to take parts from each certification. And one of those being is Red List. Now, Living Building Challenge has this program called Red List, which is a component of about 15 to 17 materials that are considered hazardous to not only the environment, but to humans as well. So in the method of construction that we choose when we're looking at bidding a project, we like to consider not using those materials whenever possible. And that's something that obviously we relay back to the owner and kind of show the benefits that it has to not only the industry and the building in the future, but to the environment. And obviously, we would be happy to pursue any of these programs if you wish. And so finally, I'd just like to talk a little bit about our pillars within the company. We have 5 pillars, but what I really like to focus on is our efficiency. As Tim showed a picture of earlier, is our formwork breakdown site that we have on every site. And what that means is that we are able to have someone break down our formwork, separate according to components, and that way we can kind of understand how much we have to work with, and really use our resources to the fullest. And what the breakdown of this is essentially, it is a focus on communication. So what that means is that we have to use all parties, kind of a hands-on, to understand what components we have to work with and where we can implement them in the future.
I'm just going to talk about a couple of lessons learned throughout the project. So working outside of the scope can sometimes be beneficial, and sometimes it cannot be beneficial. In this situation, we tried to do a little too much outside of the scope. We tried to add some extra things, and we kind of missed out on some of the opportunities we had inside of the pre-qualification packet. We understand that we should have met more areas of pre-qualification packet, but we thought that by going above and beyond that we could distance ourselves from other teams. However, we learned that we need to focus on the fundamentals first and get everything finished. And also at the end of our project, we had some issues with scheduling and time because of our overscheduling through trying to do extra things. And we had problems compiling everything at the end.
So I'd like to just thank you all for coming out this morning. We hope that we have shown you what Keystone Construction has to offer and perhaps some of the possibilities that we can provide beyond the scope of work, and also what we can provide to the building in the future and the environment in the future. Once again, thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
All right, 10-minute question period starts now.
I have a quick question, sorry. Can you flip me back 2 slides?
Sure.
One more, right there. I'm just curious where you came up with this list and the supporting information for that. Did you guys come up with that? Is that
It was kind of just a collaborative effort. You know, we really wanted to focus on, you know, in all the projects that we've been on in the past, you know, how, what really became issues that were important on the project, and kind of what wasn't important. So once we could narrow down that list, it was easy, very easy, to figure out exactly what, you know, what the background of those components might be.
nice job, because they're the typical things you see people commit to, but you kind of gave it a fresh look with the way you define them, so very nice job. You guys did a great job putting it.
Thank you.
Can you flip back to the green slide?
Sure.
Using slag concrete alternatives, green, is that included in your base bid, or is that a cost add option for you?
Well, kind of what we found is that slag is something that we can consider. We haven't explored necessarily the cost benefits to it on a grand scale, but we know that depending on the plant and depending on their methods of refining the material and heating up the cement is kind of an avenue that we explore based on region.
In short, no, this is not a currently priced product within this this bid. This is always an option for any customers that we have. Any partners in the industry, we give this as an option if this is something that they'd like to pursue.
So if we want to be green, it'd be a cost.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yes.
And there again, we also encourage you to pursue Living Building Challenge and LEED if you so choose.
Schedule piece. If we start in 1 month from today, December 1st, when do we finish, based on your current schedule?
We would be finishing with our current schedule in, I believe, June was the month. Now, here's the nice thing about that schedule is our current crew calculations can be scaled, and we have the ability to do that. It's our cost that we have there for you is with our current cost schedule. So if we decided to accelerate that schedule, there might, we might actually have to, have a discussion about cost differences, but we do our best to minimize that by a multiplicative scale. If we decide that, hey, we need to cut this in half, well, then we will do our best to meet the price that we originally gave you and still give that accelerated time scale.
Last question for Tim. You mentioned in your pre-qualification package that your team didn't meet all the criteria, essentially. Tell me, how did you arrive at that? What made you make that statement in the presentation?
I made that statement because I felt that we were missing a couple items at the end. After we went to review the packet, it seemed like there was a couple items.
Would you mind if I interrupt? Can you clarify pre-qualification packet or deliverable?
He said pre-qualification package. Yeah, was it, and that's what I wanted to find out, was it deliverable or pre-qualification? It was a deliverable.
That's my mistake.
Okay, all right.
What size crane do y'all carry?
We were able to use the 110.
And were you servicing off of one crane during this, or?
Yes. Now, we assume with a site like this that there might be other on-site and coordination with other subcontractors as far as uses of cranes and things like that are always a possibility, and sometimes good cost savings. But within this limited scope of work, we obviously had to spec our own crane. We're able to utilize the 110 because we're not using the concrete bucket itself. We're going to use a pump truck that has enough reach to be able to do what we need. So we were able to stick with that. Give
How
ourselves
did you deal with the winter concrete requirement?
Well, in the winter, obviously, you're going to have a modifier per cubic yard. You can use accelerators and things like that. What we were using is simple hot water. At the end of the day, it's going to cost you less to just use hot water. If you can have those resources. Luckily, as a concrete contractor, we actually have those on-site resources that we can bring to us. Because our ready-mix plants and things like that, obviously, they can source those themselves. But we can also do additional coatings and things like that to be able to retain all the heat that we have to.
So, is the hot water in your
Yes.
concrete number? And then,
It's part of our cubic yard.
sure. And then, sooner or later, I think the spec called to keep the concrete temperature sustained over the cure period. How were you accomplishing that?
Do you mind if I touch on that?
Absolutely.
Okay, we do have heaters. Now, the problem with heaters is they often dehumidify concrete and things like that. This can cause some brittleness. So with the heaters, we have to continue to keep it moist and things like that. So what we're gonna do is use these heaters and maintain a moisture scale that's acceptable for the curing rate.
How do you guys plan to staff the project on site and maybe outside, regional office? What's your plan there?
Well, our plan for that is with regard to project managers and foremen. Project manager will be on site as needed, but we'll have a foreman and our crew there to oversee the project throughout all concrete work that's being put in place. As far as our management goes in office, we will base and all of our deliverables will be sent to our office. We won't have an on-site trailer just because of the scope of work and the size of the project.
And also, if you can see in our breakdown that we provided within the packet, we also make it a practice to have a pre-construction, very small crew, but a crew sent out there to verify that we are in fact ready for work. Because as everyone here knows, showing up for work and not being able to put material in place can be a large factor in causing a project to lag. So we always do our best to make sure that we have a foreman and maybe even a couple of laborers out there if we need to make sure that everything is correct and we have our gravel compacted and things like that.
Was that picture a Crowder crane or Crowder job?
Where is that job site?
Yeah.
That was very familiar, actually.
That was in Rex, Georgia, right? Yeah.
We
We thought it looked similar to something we might be working with, so we thought that it might be appropriate.
That's why we brought me on the job.
We would have thought you knew with Rex Holmes that he would know about it.
Got 2 minutes.
You guys have any VE ideas for the project?
I'm sorry?
Value engineering?
Oh, As far as being able to,
We're always interested in saving money.
Yeah, absolutely.
Increasing value.
well, I mean, time is our largest value engineered product at this point, I believe, because although we have right now a relatively large time scale, we can shrink that down. And little items like those concrete beams that we were referring to, we always, we were going in there and trying to look at anything, hey, is there a way that we can reduce what you guys are having to, to pay us to do? Because at the end of the day, our bid price, we're getting paid for, and at the end of the day, if we can save you guys some money, we always try to go into cost share, or into profit sharing, savings sharing plans and things like that with any contract that we work with, so there's always a value engineering in there.
And one thing that we kind of like to also preach is our ability to deliver a project over the course of many years beyond the actual project is built. So what I mean by that is developing a management plan for the project so that it can be maintained and used long into the future. You may not realize the economic impact up front, but we have found that if you're able to do such a thing, then you really increase and cut back on the amount of renovations that you might have to do into the future. So it's just something to think about.
Final question. Do you have any more questions?
1 minute.
Okay. Why should we hire you? Why should we select Keystone over the other contractors?
Well, I think I'd like to tag team that with Matt, kind of jointly. But we are a reputable company that has a history for being producing quality and accurate work within the Mid-Atlantic region, especially with regard to concrete. That being said, every project is a little bit different, and we really like to explore every single aspect of the means, the methods, the plans, the scope of work, everything. And so what that does for us is it allows us to really engage ourselves into the project and build it before it's actually put on site.
We're that company that when you ask to change something, we're not gonna butt heads. We're gonna understand that it's an ever evolving project every time we get to work with any company. And so everything from change orders and obviously any sort of special request you might have for us, we always do our best to meet the needs or the requests of any of our contractors, because of the fact that we're not here for working one job. We like to create a relationship. And so we can't do that unless we have your trust, we have your confidence that we are going to work for you.
That's time.
All right. Thank you very much.